She looked him in the eye across the length of the wardroom, read the demotion order aloud, and stripped his access credentials in front of her entire staff. His name was Hal Voss, Tier 0 contracted technical auxiliary, no weapons clearance, no combat rating, no place at the table. General Cyrex Kolvryan was flat about it. Unauthorized engagement, civilian override of military protocol, and the human stood at attention with his hands clasped behind his back and said nothing at all. 6 hours later, he would come down through the ceiling of her private quarters with a maintenance wrench in one fist and 3 ribs grinding into his lung. And by the time the corridor lights came back up, a traitor would be kneeling in his own blood, and the general who had demoted the human would owe him her life twice more. 6 hours before any of that, the air on Deck 4 of the Coalition warship Unbroken Resolve smelled like copper, burnt ozone, and lubricant sweating out of legacy Earth relay banks that nobody else would touch. She had catalogued him in week 1 and never updated the entry. Voss H. Human Male, age 32, recruited under the Auxiliary Technical Framework 6 months into the Coalition experiment. Assignment: 2 banks of legacy Earth-standard relay terminals that ran the diplomatic backchannels between Terran contingents and Coalition Command. Deck 4, beneath the reactor cowling, above the recyclers. The Vethkai crew's carapace lights dimmed to a dull grey whenever he passed them in the corridor. That was their species' involuntary signal for irrelevant. Cyrex's own carapace had done the same the one time she had passed him in a lift. It was not personal, it was biology. Her species had evolved in a shell canopy world where attention was a resource and irrelevant was a color. She had never seen him properly until he walked out of a diplomatic corridor with 7 Kavari bodies behind him and asked for a bandage. Her true name was a sequence of mandible clicks that the ship's translator had compressed to Cyrex. Her rank was general of a coalition wing that did not on paper exist yet. The morning of the demotion, at 0600, the Kavari delegation was still on approach. 12 councillors, 4 aides, 1 blood warden. The Kavari always brought a blood warden. A blood warden was a religious officer whose only job was to bless the words of the treaty, and Cyrex had learned over the years that a blood warden's blessing carried a knife under its tongue. The treaty in question would close the Vesican corridor to independent shipping. Cyrex was against it. Cyrex had been against it in 3 separate memoranda that had been buried by Coalition Command, which was why Command had chosen to hold the signing on her ship instead of theirs. If the ink dried under her command, she was co-signatory, whether her signature was on the paper or not. It was an old political trick, and she recognized it, and she had spent the morning composing a 4th memorandum she knew she would never send. Her chief of staff, Yexi, had brought her a thermal tube of the pale honey water that the Vethkai drank in place of coffee. It was cold by the time the corridor lights failed. That was the first thing, not an alarm, not a klaxon, a drop in the ambient hum of the ceiling filaments, gone from 6,000 cycles per second down to nothing, and only Cyrex's ears registered it because Vethkai hearing lived in the ultrasonics. She stood up so fast, her chair fell over behind her. Yexi looked at her. "General?" "They cut the filaments," Cyrex said. "That is a masking cut. They are coming in behind it." Yexi's carapace lights flared from calm blue to alarm violet. Before she could reach the wall panel, the anteroom door sighed open, and the first Kovari assassin came through wearing a diplomatic robe and a phase blade folded up into the sleeve of it. Cyrex was on the far side of the table. Yexi was closer. Yexi died first. The phase blade opened her throat in a single arc, and she was on the floor before her lights had cycled to grey, and then the assassin was reaching across her body for the general. Cyrex was going for the drawer where her sidearm was locked when she heard the ventilation grill come out of the wall. Not fall, punched. A tungsten core fire wrench came out of the vent first. It was held in a bare human hand she had never looked at properly. It hit the Kovari assassin at the base of the skull with a sound like a full-weight hammer meeting a ripe fruit. The Kovari's phase blade cut a long slice of the tabletop as he fell. Hal Voss climbed out of the ventilation shaft on his belly. He stood up. He glanced down at Yexi. He glanced at Cyrex. He glanced at the anteroom door. "There's more coming down the corridor," he said. His voice was flat. "Get behind me." Cyrex was a general. Cyrex did not get behind anyone. She reached the drawer, drew her sidearm, and clicked the safety off with a mandible flex. By then, Hal was already at the doorway with the wrench held down at his hip, the way a field hand holds a scythe, waiting. "I said, get behind me," he said again, quieter. She did not answer. The corridor door opened. They came in fast. 11 of them, 2 abreast, phase blades drawn, the lead pair already committing. The lead pair never made it past Hal. He took the first one in the throat with a rising cut of the wrench and the second one in the temple with the backswing. And both bodies were on the deck before the third and fourth got past the frame. The third one had a phase disruptor pistol. It was set to broadband. It caught Hal square in the chest at less than 2 meters, and Cyrex saw the entire man go rigid for a half-second, then step forward through the beam, then close the distance and put the wrench through the assassin's face. He absorbed a hit that would drop a Vethkai soldier in one shot. He absorbed it and kept walking. Cyrex would spend the next 6 hours thinking about that. She would think about it while she gave her deposition to internal security. She would think about it while she reviewed the corridor footage frame by frame. She would think about it while she signed his demotion order. The disruptor beam had been calibrated for the thoracic ganglion, the nerve cluster that ran every Kovari and every Vethkai and every insectoid analog in the coalition. It scrambled the ganglion and shut the body down. Human nervous systems, she would learn later, did not run through a single thoracic ganglion. Human nervous systems ran through a whole spine of them, distributed, redundant, primitive. The pulse that scrambled a Vethkai just made a human angry. But she did not know that yet. She only knew that a maintenance technician had walked through a beam that would have killed her and kept coming. The other assassins were still trying to get into the room. Hal had funneled them at the doorway, and the doorway was, for one man with a wrench, defensible. He put the fourth one down with a hooking blow to the knee joint and then the throat. The fifth one closed inside the swing of the wrench and drove a phase blade toward Hal's gut, and Hal caught the assassin's wrist with his free hand, twisted and broke it, and took the blade off the falling man and drove the wrench head through the assassin's chest without appearing to think about it. The sixth one, seeing this, tried to back out into the corridor. Hal took him in the base of the spine with a thrown wrench shard he had picked up off the floor of the vent shaft. The seventh one, Cyrex, shot herself. That was 5 who made it into the doorway, and 2 more Hal took before they crossed it, and by then the remaining 5 were retreating back down the corridor at a dead run. The whole engagement lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Cyrex would count it later off the corridor timestamp. 4 minutes and 11 seconds, 7 bodies, 1 wrench. When her security detail arrived, Hal was leaning against the wall, breathing hard with a maintenance rag pressed to a cut over his eye. He looked at the ranking security officer, then at the general. "I was in the corridor," he said, by way of explanation. "The vent shaft comes up here from the technical spine. I was going to my shift." Nobody said anything. He shrugged. "Ma'am, I need to log this into the incident stack. It's regulation." Cyrex stared at him. He turned, walked past the bodies, and went back into the vent. She stood in the wardroom for a long moment after he was gone. Yexi was still on the floor. Yexi had been with her 17 years. The honey water tube had spilled across the tabletop and was pooling around the phase blade cut. Cyrex could feel her carapace lights strobing without her permission, a color she had not shown in front of subordinates since she was very young. Then she straightened. She stripped her uniform of the ceremonial sash. She called her staff. She told them the delegation was suspended. She told them to compose the demotion order, unauthorized engagement, civilian override of military protocol, because that was the only way this made sense. Because if she promoted him, she was announcing to the entire coalition that a Tier 0 human had walked through a disruptor beam that was supposed to kill her elite, and she could not do that. Not with the Kovari watching. Not with her own command watching. Not while she still did not understand what she had just seen. Demotion was the containment. Demotion was the leash. Demotion put him back on Deck 4, where he could not do anything else that she could not explain. She read the order aloud in front of her staff, and he stood at attention and said nothing, not one word. He did not defend himself. He did not offer context. He did not ask why. When the order was finished, he saluted with a fist across his chest, the human sign, and turned on his heel and walked out. That was 1400 hours. 6 hours later, she would owe him her life again. And after that, again. She did not sleep in the interval. She sat in her ready room and pulled his file. Boss, Hal, contracted through the Northern Continental Terran Hiring Registry, prior civilian employment, wildland fire response, 6 years in a region called Ontario, in a country called Canada, on a planet called Earth. She had heard of Ontario. It was cold. It was on the northern rim of the Terran continental landmass, and the fires there consumed forests larger than most coalition preserves. She read the employment history twice. He had cracked frozen hydrant housings at -30 for 6 years with the same 8-kilogram tungsten fire wrench he had used to kill 7 trained assassins in her wardroom. It was a purpose-built tool for breaking frozen metal. Kovari armor plating was, according to the specifications in front of her, calibrated in the same tensile range as frozen municipal hydrant housings. That was the first cold thing. The second cold thing was that his military records were sealed, not classified, sealed. There was a difference. Classified meant the coalition had the file and was refusing to share it. Sealed meant the file had been physically removed from the coalition database and replaced with a marker that said, in effect, "Do not look here." She had authority to unseal. She used it. The file came back partial. 3 lines of text. The first line said Voss, Hal M. The second line said Assignment, 103rd Long-Range Reconnaissance Wing, Tellurian Special Response Command. The third line said, in a font that had not been updated since the humans first joined the coalition, Status, Killed in Action, Vesikin Colony Incident, Coalition Standard Year 2441. The Vesikin Colony Incident had been 10 years ago. Cyrex sat very still. The 103rd Long Range had been the Tellurian unit sent to hold Vesikin against the first Kovari incursion. The 103rd had held Vesikin for 11 weeks against a Kovari force 40 times its size. And the coalition had eventually retaken the colony to find the 103rd dead to the last man. 35 bodies. Everyone accounted for, recovered, buried, named on the memorial wall in the coalition capital. Everyone. Except that one of them was, apparently, alive and working on Deck 4 of her warship. Cyrex read the file a 3rd time. Then she pulled the memorial wall records. Then she pulled the Vesikin recovery manifest. 35 names, 35 recovered bodies, positive identification on all of them. She sat back. Somebody had put a wrong body on a memorial wall. She did not know yet why that mattered, but she knew it did. She knew it in the way she knew when a subordinate was lying. She knew it in the way she had known the honey water tube was cold. Something did not fit, and until it fit, she was not going to be able to think. She sent a secure query to the Coalition archive requesting a full personnel file for the 103rd, keyed to Voss. The archive replied within 2 minutes. There was no such file. The archive said the file had been destroyed in a routine data purge 4 years earlier. Cyrex checked the archive's own audit log. The archive had never purged a personnel file in its entire history. Somebody had walked into the archive and erased Hal Voss. Somebody with archive-level clearance. Somebody at Coalition Command. Somebody who did not want Hal Voss traceable back to the 103rd. Cyrex closed the file. She checked the time. 1900 hours. She had missed the emergency treaty meeting. She stood, walked to her private quarters, sat down at her desk, and pulled the corridor footage from the wardroom attack for the 11th time. She watched Hal Voss walk through the phase disruptor beam. She watched his hand, in the frame just before he swung the wrench through the assassin's chest, do something small and specific. He tilted the wrench head. He tilted it because the Kovari armor had a joint seam at the pectoral plate, and the joint seam was 1 millimeter deep, and the wrench head hit that seam and drove through it. He knew where the seam was. He knew where the seam was on a species he had, according to his file, never encountered before. He was Tier 0 contracted technical auxiliary. He was, according to her authority, a maintenance technician. He was, according to a purged file and a wrong name on a memorial wall, a ghost of a unit that the Coalition had officially buried a decade ago. Cyrex pushed back from the desk. The room lights were the standard blue-white of Vethkai officer quarters. Her carapace lights were pulsing a color she had not shown since she was a cadet. It was the color her species used, involuntarily, when the thing they were looking at was much larger than they had originally believed. That was when the door chime went. It was her senior tactical officer, Commander Veth Lun. He came in without waiting for permission, which was unusual, and he came in carrying a data slate, which was normal. His carapace lights were the alarm violet of an officer bringing an update at speed. "General," he said, "the Kovari have accepted the delay. The signing is postponed until the incident is resolved. The Blood Warden is asking to be given quarters in the ambassadorial suite." "Denied," Cyrex said. "The Blood Warden goes into detention until we know who sent those assassins. General, the Blood Warden is a religious officer under Coalition treaty. He is exempt from detention." "Detention," Cyrex said again. Vethelun's lights flickered. Once, very briefly. She noticed, and did not know she had noticed. He inclined his head. "As you order, General." She dismissed him, and he left, and she sat with the data slate he had put on her desk, and she felt the small thing at the base of her mind that had noticed his light flicker begin to grow. She reviewed the incident data. Among the recovered items on the wardroom floor was a small hardware object about the size of her smallest claw joint. It had been recovered from the corridor 1 meter from the body of the 5th assassin. The internal security report identified it as a Coalition-grade frequency chip, standard issue, encrypted. The report said the chip's encryption tag had been submitted for matching to see whose device it came from. The report did not yet include a match. Cyrex thought about that for a long time. Then she opened her own terminal, keyed her own private access to the chip registry, and ran the match herself. The result came back in 11 seconds. Registered owner, Commander Vethlun Roshkai, Senior Tactical Officer, Coalition Warship Unbroken Resolve. Her senior tactical officer's chip had been in the corridor with the assassins. Cyrex went very still. She did not stand up. She did not sound an alarm. She did not call for security, because security answered up the chain to the tactical officer. She sat at her desk, and she thought about how large the thing she had just discovered was, and she thought about what it meant that Vethelun had come to her quarters 12 minutes ago to ask about the Blood Warden. He had been checking whether she knew. He had left, which meant she still had time. She stood up. She walked to her wall safe, opened it, took out her personal sidearm, the one that was not on the ship's registry, the one that would not appear if somebody wiped her authorized weapon list, and put it into the small of back holster she had not worn since the border wars. She sat back down. She waited to see who would come to her quarters next. The problem, she realized, was that she could not call for help. If Vethlin was compromised, the tactical net was compromised. If the tactical net was compromised, the security detail was compromised. If the security detail was compromised, the ship was a Kovari trap wearing her flag. She had exactly one person on this ship who was demonstrably not in Vethlin's chain of command. She had demoted him at 1400 hours. She thought about that. She thought about the corridor footage. She thought about the millimeter-deep armor seam. She thought about the sealed file and the wrong body on the memorial wall. She stood up, went to her terminal, and composed a single-line message to Deck 4 maintenance. Her draft said, "Voss, my quarters. Now, come through the vent." She stared at it for a long moment. She deleted the word "now" and typed quietly. She sent it. Then she sat down to wait. Down on Deck 4, Hal Voss was already moving. He'd been moving since 1500 hours, in fact, when he had come back from the wardroom, sat down in the small alcove that served as his office, and opened his personal locker. The personal locker contained a coffee tin, empty, ceremonial, from the Ontario ration line, a small photograph of a girl of about 12 with a snowsuit and a gap between her front teeth, and a coalition-grade frequency chip that he had pulled off the corridor floor with his sleeve before the security sweep and slipped into his coverall pocket in the 4 seconds between the last assassin dying and the security detail arriving. He had known, standing over the fifth body, that the chip was significant. Standard-issue coalition tech had no business being on a Kovari assassin. Standard-issue coalition tech dropped in the corridor of a Vethkai flagship during a Kovari hit meant the hit had a handler inside the ship. He had also known that if he handed the chip to internal security, the chip would enter the incident evidence chain and be processed by whichever officer the security net wanted to process it. That officer might be the handler. That officer would then quietly lose the chip, so he had pocketed it. He was not, strictly speaking, authorized to do that. He had spent the 4 hours between his shift alcove and Cyrex's summons, matching the chip's encryption tag to the crew registry, using a legacy Earth relay terminal that nobody on the Coalition side thought to audit, because it was a legacy Earth relay terminal that nobody on the Coalition side even knew how to log into. The match had taken him 2 hours and 40 minutes, most of which was rebuilding a decryption routine he had not run in 10 years. He had also spent that time crawling. He had spent it doing what his coverall said he was doing, which was conduit inspection, which was a job that required him to physically enter every maintenance crawl space between the reactor cowling and the officer decks. He had mapped every route between his own workspace, the general's quarters, the tactical officer's quarters, the armory, and the diplomatic wing. He had done it because, in his professional opinion, which he had not shared with anybody, another hit was coming, and it was coming tonight. The chip's encryption tag had matched to Commander Vethlin Roshkai an hour before Cyrex ran the same match at her desk. Hal had sat with that for about a minute. Then he had gone back to work. When Cyrex's message came in, he was already in the crawl space 3 meters below her floor. He read it twice. He typed back 3 words. "On my way." He came up through the ceiling panel with the maintenance wrench slung through a loop on his hip and a fire axe he had signed out of the emergency locker at 1800 hours held loosely in his right hand. Cyrex was sitting at her desk. She looked up when the panel lifted. She saw the axe. She said nothing. He climbed down. He set the ceiling panel back into place. He walked to her desk. He put the frequency chip on it. "That's from the corridor," he said. "I picked it up. It's Vethlin's." "I know," Cyrex said. "Good. Then we skip that part." She looked at him. He looked tired. There was a small bruise along his jaw where somebody's phase blade guard had caught him earlier. His coverall had a fresh tear at the shoulder. "You are here in violation of your demotion order," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "You will be executed. Later," he said. "If you like." She almost laughed. She did not. "There will be a second attempt," she said. 2,200 hours, he said. "Give or take 20 minutes. 3-man team coming through the maintenance tunnel from deck 6. They'll come at your bedroom, not this office. Blade work, not disruptors. They cannot afford another corridor incident. They need it quiet." "How do you know?" "Because that's what I would do," he said, "if I were them." "Meaning?" He hesitated. Then he said, "There was a place I worked a long time ago. That was our approach vector for a target of your rank in a stateroom. Vent riser, kitchen alcove, bedroom door, silent, blade only. Never a disruptor at that range because the disruptor lights the corridor." She watched his face. There was nothing in it. "Voss," she said, "your file says you were killed in action at Vesikin 10 years ago." "I know it does." "You are not going to explain?" "Not tonight, ma'am." She let that stand. She had bigger problems. "Vethlun will come after," Hal said. "He will not send a 4th-generation blade team and then let them fail without following up personally. He will come here himself. Probably closer to 0400 when your carapace cycle is at its lowest attention state, and my crew rotation has me signed out to the recycler decks." "You have thought about this quite carefully." "I have had 6 hours." "You have had 6 hours since I demoted you." "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him. "Why are you here, Voss?" He was quiet for a long time. "I have a survival clause," he said. "In the contract, it pays out to my sister if I die. She is 12. She lives in a cold water walk-up in Thunder Bay, on the northern rim of the Great Lakes, and the walk-up costs 640 coalition credits a month, which is more than she can make and more than our aunt can make. If I complete this contract, the survival clause pays out anyway at end of term. If I die on mission, it pays out double, immediately, tax-exempt, no recovery period. Either way she keeps the walk-up, either way she eats." "So you want to die?" "No, ma'am. I want to complete the contract, which means I want you to still be breathing at end of term, because if you die, the contract dissolves, the survival clause voids, and my sister goes to a state ward, and I have seen a state ward." She was silent. "So I am here," he said, "because your death is very expensive to me." Cyrex thought about that. Cyrex thought about the wrong body on the memorial wall, and the 12-year-old girl in the cold water walk-up, and the way the human in front of her had gone perfectly still while he explained why the general who had demoted him needed to live through the night. "Understood," she said. He nodded once. "I need to reposition," he said. 2,200 hours in your bedroom. They will not check the ceiling, because the ceiling is Vethkai standard, and the maintenance shaft only comes down from deck 6 for humans of my grade. It will not occur to them that a Tier 0 has business up there. That is my ambush. And after? After I try not to bleed out, and you decide whether you still want to execute me." He climbed back up the ceiling panel. He replaced it. He was gone. Cyrex sat at her desk in the very quiet room and stared at the frequency chip. She did not know it yet, but the largest part of what was coming was still hidden behind that chip. What Hal Voss had already worked out, what she had not yet worked out, was that Vethlun was not the top of the pyramid. Vethlun was a middle rung. The Blood Warden the Kovari had brought aboard was not there to bless a treaty. The Blood Warden was there to detonate one. The treaty was a delivery mechanism. The moment the ink dried on the Vesikin corridor closure, an old coalition subclause locked in, a subclause that gave the treaty's signatory ship's admiralty full command authority over the corridor for 6 standard months. If the ship went down before the treaty signed, the corridor stayed open and the Kovari lost. But if the ship survived and the treaty signed, and the admiral of the ship then died shortly thereafter. Command authority over the corridor rolled to the ship's second-in-command. The ship's second-in-command was Vethelun. Vethelun did not want Cyrex dead in the wardroom. That was the Coalition's read on it, and the Coalition's read on it was wrong. Vethelun wanted the wardroom hit to fail and be visibly blamed on the Kovari. Then Vethelun wanted Cyrex to sign the treaty out of a hardened refusal to bow to intimidation. Then Vethelun wanted Cyrex to die in her quarters that night, quietly, and be found in the morning of what would look like a follow-up hit by the same Kovari faction. And then Vethelun wanted the corridor. The wardroom hit had been designed to succeed only in its failure. 12 blades against a ship's general at the wardroom door. That was Kovari intimidation theater. If the blades had gotten through, fine. Vethelun would have taken over anyway. But the blades getting through was not the plan. The plan was for the general to survive the intimidation, sign the treaty out of Vethkai's spine, and then die in her sleep. Which meant the blades had been chosen for exactly enough of a threat to serve the theater, and exactly not enough to actually kill a Vethkai general with a locked drawer and a sidearm. Which meant that when a human maintenance technician had walked out of a ceiling vent with an 8-kilogram wrench and killed 7 of them in 4 minutes, Vethelun's entire pyramid had cracked at the base. Hal Voss was not supposed to have been there. Hal Voss, as far as Vethelun knew, was a Tier 0, irrelevant, grey light. His shift did not start until 1500 hours. He had, according to the shift log, been 39 minutes early. Vethelun would spend those 39 minutes chewing on why for the rest of his short career. At 21:50, Hal was in the crawlspace above Cyrex's bedroom. He had positioned himself on his stomach across the maintenance rail, fire axe within reach, wrench in his belt loop, breathing through his mouth to stay quiet. He had lifted the ceiling panel by 3 millimeters to give him a firing line down through the bedroom and a sight line on the doorway. Cyrex was in her office on the far side of the wall, in front of a false readiness display that made it look like she was asleep at her desk. She had her sidearm across her knee. She had asked Hal, before he had gone up, whether she should be in the bedroom to draw them in. He had said no. He had said that if they got a look at the bed and saw it empty, they might extract and come back with heavier tools. He had said that the trick was to make them think the bed had somebody in it, so that they would enter and get committed, and then he would come down through the ceiling and take them from above. That was exactly what happened. At 2204 hours, the maintenance tunnel access panel behind the kitchen alcove came off its magnets, and 3 Kovari operatives came through it in a silent single file. They were carrying phase blades, not disruptors. Blade work, not one of them looked up. They moved down the short corridor to the bedroom door. They arranged themselves at the door frame. The lead one lifted the door override with his free hand. The door slid open on the general's bed, with a general-shaped mass under the covers where Hal had piled every spare blanket and 1 heat pad set to Vethkai body temperature. The lead operative stepped into the room and lifted the blade to cut. Hal came down through the ceiling with the axe. 8 kilograms of fire wrench had been enough for a wardroom. 8 kilograms of fire axe, dropped from 1.5 meters of vertical with the full weight of a 100-kilogram human behind it, was more than enough for a Kovari at the base of the neck. The first operative went down without a sound. The second one had time to turn and lift his blade. He did not have time to swing it. Hal took him in the collarbone with the axe, ripped it out sideways through the trapezius, and had the wrench out of his belt loop by the time the third operative was reaching for a distress signal. The third one Hal took across the temple with the wrench. The whole thing lasted 11 seconds. Nobody screamed. Nobody hit a wall. The bedroom carpet took the bodies without a sound. Kovari operatives on penetration missions wore magnetic soft boots, and their armor was internally lined for silence. They died the way they had come in. Hal was already dragging the first body clear when Cyrex opened the connecting door. She stopped in the doorway. She looked at the 3 bodies. She looked at Hal. He was breathing hard. There was Kovari blood, purple and viscous, across the front of his coverall. He had a shallow cut along his left forearm where the second operative's blade had grazed him on the swing. He said 2 of those didn't get to touch the alarm. The third one might have keyed his subvocal. If he did, Vethlin already knows. Cyrex said, the alarm net runs through tactical. So the alarm is Vethlin's alarm. If he got it, he'll come. He'll come with backup, maybe not many, because the whole point is quiet, maybe 2, maybe 3. Or he'll come alone. Hal looked at her for a moment. Or he'll come alone. If he does, it's because he wants to look you in the eyes when it happens. He will not, Cyrex said flatly. She checked her sidearm. He will not look me in the eyes. Hal nodded. He stepped over one of the bodies. He picked up the phase blade the second operative had dropped. He tested it in his hand once and set it back down. That's not for me, he said. It's an energy blade. It cuts on the pulse. Vethlin will be in a military exoframe. I saw the transport manifest for command-grade personal armor last month. The exoframe has a phase shielding grid. A phase blade will glance off it. The wrench will not. The wrench cannot penetrate an exoframe either, Voss. The wrench, he said quietly, does not need to penetrate. The wrench needs to hit the actuator joint at the hip. There is a 2-centimeter gap between the plating and the hydraulics, and if you break the actuator, the leg locks up and the exoframe becomes a coffin. Then you take the head. Cyrex looked at him. You know a lot about coalition-grade exoframes. Yes, ma'am. For a maintenance technician. Yes, ma'am. She let it stand. He said, I need 30 seconds. There's a service panel in the wall behind your bookcase. I'm going to open it. When Vethlin comes through the front door, you draw him toward the office and get him talking. He will want you talking. He will want to explain to you why he had to do this. I need him talking because I need him in the center of the room and I need him distracted. And you? I come through the service panel behind him with the wrench. She nodded once. Do it. He did. Cyrex, in the 12 minutes before Vethlin arrived, stood in her office at her desk in her ceremonial half-tunic, with her carapace lights dialed to the color she wore when she was receiving Kovari envoys. Formal violet, sharp edges. She held her sidearm behind her back where the wall camera would not see it. She waited. The front chime went at 0352, not 0400. Vethlin was early. Vethlin was worried. She keyed the door. Vethlin came in wearing a full command-grade exoframe with his sidearm drawn and his carapace lights dark, which was, in Vethkai body language, the color of a species going to commit a violence it did not have permission for. He came alone. Hal had been right. Vethlin had come alone because Vethlin had wanted to look her in the eyes when it happened. He crossed the anteroom to her office door. He said, General, I regret that this is necessary. Cyrex said, You do not. His lights flickered. Sit down, he said. His voice was calm. This will be easier if you sit down. You are asking me to sit down in my own office at 0400 with a sidearm in your hand, Commander. That is a great deal to ask. General, please, I have thought about this. You have thought about the corridor, she said. 2.3 billion credits per standard week. 6 months of that. That is what you thought about. His lights went very dark. You know, I know. Then this is easier. He raised the sidearm. Behind him, the service panel in the wall behind the bookcase slid open on its hinge without a sound, and Hal Voss came out of it with the 8-kilogram tungsten wrench raised. The strike went into Vethlin's exoframe, right where Hal had said it would go. 2 centimeters. Hip actuator. There was a wet crunch of composite armor and hydraulic lines shearing, and Vethlin's left leg locked up and the exoframe started to tip. Vethlin was still Vethlin. He was faster than any human. He got the sidearm around and fired. Hal was already moving. The disruptor pulse caught him across the ribs on the left side. Cyrex heard something in him crack, heard the intake of breath he tried to suppress, saw him grimace, keep his feet, and bring the wrench around anyway in a rising arc that hit Vethlin in the sidearm hand and broke both the frame's finger actuators and the wrist under them. The sidearm hit the floor. Vethlin tried to backhand Hal with the free arm. Hal caught the arm at the elbow, pivoted, and dragged the tactical officer down toward the deck the way a wildland technician drags a burning branch off a hydrant. There was no elegance to it. There was leverage and gravity. Vethlin, in the locked exo-frame, went where Hal took him. He hit the floor on his back. Hal was on top of him before he could roll. He put the wrench across Vethlin's throat and leaned. "Commander," Hal said quietly, "you cracked one of my ribs. I did not like that. Do you want to talk about the corridor, or should we go straight to me sitting here until you stop breathing?" Vethlin's lights strobed the fast pale color of a species in acute pain. He wheezed something. "Say it again," Hal said. "The corridor," Vethlin rasped. "Yes, the corridor, but, Cyrex said, coming forward. "But it was not just—" He stopped. Hal eased the wrench a hair. "It was not just the corridor." Vethlin looked at Cyrex. His eye plates were unfocusing. The exo-frame was pumping something into him to keep him conscious, but there was internal bleeding, and Cyrex could see it in the way his mandible muscles were losing tone. "The corridor," he whispered, "was only the ground floor. Above me there is—" "An admiral," Cyrex said. His lights flickered acknowledgement. "Which one?" she said. He did not answer. Hal leaned. "Which one?" "Kaishvur," Vethlin whispered. Cyrex went cold. Admiral Kaishvur Menoth was the second most senior Vethkai officer in the Coalition military. He was the officer who had appointed Cyrex to the Unbroken Resolve. He was also the officer to whom Coalition Command would report a demotion order for a Tier 0 human if such an order had been issued in unusual circumstances involving a corridor incident and a Kovari delegation. Kaishvur would have been the officer reviewing her wardroom footage right now. Kaishvur would have been the officer who had, at some point in the last 3 years, arranged for a Tellurian Special Response Operator's file to be sealed and his body to be reported dead at Vesican, not because the operator had died, because the operator was, at some point, going to be useful. Cyrex looked at Hal. Hal was looking at Vethlin, but his face had changed, not dramatically, just a small thing at the corners of his mouth, a small tightening. "You know that name," Cyrex said. "I do." "How?" "He is the officer who signed my papers," Hal said. His voice was very even. 10 years ago, when Vesican fell, he is the officer who told me my unit had been declared dead. He is the officer who offered me a maintenance contract on this ship 6 months ago. He is the officer who told me that Tier 0 was the highest clearance he could get me. He is the officer, Hal said, who put me on this ship because he thought that if things went sideways for General Colvrain tonight, I would go down with her, and it would look accidental. Cyrex stared at him. "He put you here to die," she said. "He put me here," Hal said, "so that when things went sideways for you, they would go sideways cleanly, and the Tier 0 human he had personally placed on Deck 4 would be one of the bodies collected up in the after-action report, and nothing would ever get audited. He did not know I would look up in the corridor. He did not know I would come through the vent. But he arranged this. He arranged all of it. Vethlin is the knife. Kaishvur is the arm." Cyrex was silent for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "He is on the ship." Hal blinked. "What?" "Kaishvur. He is on the ship. He arrived this afternoon with the Kovari delegation. He is in the Admiral's suite, 3 decks up." Hal was still. Then he said, "I did not know that." Vethlin was going out. His lights were dimming toward the flat, colorless gray of a Vethkai losing consciousness. Hal looked down at him. "Commander," he said, "I need one more thing." Vethlin's mandibles worked. "The Blood Warden," Hal said. "The Kovari Blood Warden. He is not what the delegation says he is. What is he? Vethlin said very softly. He is. He stopped. He said more clearly, with what was left of his focus. He is the trigger. There is a device under the ambassador's suite. He carries the codes. If I fail, if tonight fails, he detonates. It is a contingency. Detonates what? Cyrex said. Vethlun did not answer. Hal said, detonates the ship. Vethlin's eye plates closed. His lights went out. He was not dead. Cyrex could see him breathing shallowly through the mandible slits. But he was gone for the interview. Hal sat back on his heels. He winced and pressed one hand to his ribs. His coverall was dark with blood down the left side. His breath was coming shallow. Cyrex knelt across from him. Voss, I am fine, ma'am. You are not fine. He looked at her. His eyes were tired, but they were focused. Time is short, ma'am. There is a Vethkai admiral on this ship who wants us both dead, and a Kovhari blood warden who has a detonator wired to the diplomatic wing. We have, he checked the wall chrono, roughly 90 minutes before Kaishavur figures out Vethlin is not answering. 90 minutes to do what? Kill the blood warden, reach the admiral, undo his codes, in that order. Voss, you have a cracked rib and a phase burn. Yes, ma'am. And a wrench. Yes, ma'am. I would prefer to have my axe as well. She almost laughed again. Almost. All right, Voss, she said. The blood warden first. Then she looked at his left side. The bloodstain had gone from the size of her palm to the size of her forearm in the last 30 seconds. Voss, ma'am, you are bleeding through your coverall onto my carpet. Yes, ma'am. Fix it. He looked at her a long moment. Then he peeled the front of his coverall down to the waist. There was a shallow, deep cut along the ribs where the disruptor discharge had opened him up, and a longer, deeper laceration along the collarbone from an assassin's blade earlier that he had not shown her. He had a Vethkai emergency field kit clipped to his belt. He pulled it. He opened it. He took out the tissue stapler. Cyrex watched him staple his own collarbone shut without an anesthetic. He worked with the concentration of a technician on a broken fuse. Not fast, not slow. He put in 7 staples. He hissed once through his teeth on the 5th. He did not stop. When it was done, he wiped his hands on the discarded piece of his coverall, and he pressed a cauterizer over the disruptor burn, and held it there until his forearm started to shake, and the smell of burned meat filled the room. Then he put the cauterizer down. He looked up at her. Better, he said. Not good. Better. Cyrex, in the doorway of her own office, was staring at him with a color in her carapace lights she had not shown anybody since her mother had died. You did that, she said, without anesthetic. Ma'am, there was no time to be delicate. Fill the hole. Move. He picked up the wrench. He picked up his fire axe from the corner where he had leaned it. He looked at her. After you, he said. She led. She was in her formal half-tunic, and she had put the ceremonial short blade at her hip, and she carried the sidearm at low ready, and she led him out of the office and down her private corridor toward the diplomatic wing. At the corridor junction, she stopped, turned, looked at him. Voss. Ma'am. When you have finished this, she said, we are going to have a conversation. Yes, ma'am. They moved. The diplomatic wing was 3 decks up and 1 section aft. In a normal hour, Cyrex would have called for a security escort. She could not. Every officer on the tactical net answered to Vethlun, and every officer above Vethlun answered to Kaishvur. She had, for the first time in her career, no chain of command she could trust. She had a maintenance technician with a wrench. They took the service lifts. Hal keyed them with an override he apparently had that she had not known any Tier 0 could have. She did not ask. The lift doors opened onto the diplomatic wing corridor, and Hal, standing behind her, said very quietly, "The Blood Warden's room, is the second door on the left. The door has an armored core, 12-centimeter titanium sandwich, not going to break it. But the door is a servo door. The servo runs off Deck 4 power. If we cut the servo, the door has to be opened manually from the inside. If we knock on the door, the Blood Warden opens it manually to see who is knocking. Voss, he will not open the door for 2 people with weapons. He will not see 2 people with weapons. He will see a maintenance technician. Ma'am, take 3 steps back and stand in the shadow of the alcove. When he opens the door, I go in first. She hesitated. Then she stepped back. Hal walked to the door. He was a bloodied human, in a torn coverall with an 8-kilogram wrench in one hand and a fire axe hooked into his belt. He knocked on the door with the wrench. He said in fluent trade standard Kovari, "Maintenance override. Life support is fluctuating on this deck. I need to check your recycler intake." There was a pause. The door opened 3 centimeters on its manual chain. Through the crack, Cyrex saw the pale skin and the ceremonial ash markings of a Kovari Blood Warden. She saw the eyes register a coverall and a wrench and dismiss the human behind them as irrelevant. She saw the door start to close. Hal put the wrench head into the crack and pried. The chain snapped. He was inside the room in half a second. Cyrex did not see the next 4 seconds clearly. She saw a flash of Hal's coverall against the doorframe. She heard the wrench hit twice. She heard something metallic hit the floor. She heard a Kovari voice start to raise an alarm cry and then choke off. Wet. Then Hal came back to the door and pushed it open. The Blood Warden was on the floor. He was still alive, barely. Hal had put the wrench under his jaw and pinned his tongue against the roof of his mouth with the flat of the wrench head. The Blood Warden could not speak the trigger phrase. "General," Hal said, "come in. Close the door." She came in. She closed the door. On the low table beside the Blood Warden's ceremonial dais was a small ivory-colored oblong device with a Kovari religious sigil etched on it. It had a small green light. "That is the trigger," Hal said. "The green light means it is armed. If he speaks the phrase, or if the light goes red, or if his heart stops without me completing the ceremonial deactivation sequence within 38 seconds, the device transmits to a receiver in the shielding grid under the ambassador's suite, and the receiver detonates 7 kilograms of fuel-air pressure charge under the diplomatic wing. 7 kilograms is enough to blow out the entire deck and pull the 2 decks above it into the void. If the corridor between the diplomatic wing and the reactor cowling has a compromised bulkhead, and it does, because I checked it 3 days ago on my rounds, the reactor cowling suffers a secondary breach. This ship goes." Cyrex looked down at the Blood Warden. "How do you deactivate?" "I do not," Hal said. "I don't know the ceremonial sequence. It is a species-specific religious rite. He does, and he has 38 seconds after his heart stops." The Blood Warden's eyes were rolling. He was trying to bite through his own tongue. Hal had the wrench angled to prevent it, but the Blood Warden was going into shock, and his mandibles were starting to spasm, and if the mandibles closed hard enough, the tongue would tear either way. Cyrex stepped forward. She knelt in front of the Blood Warden. "Warden," she said in trade Kovari. Her voice was very steady. "I know you. I know the Order of the Ninth Silence. I know the ceremonial sequence. I have signed treaties with your order for 11 years, and I have watched 27 blessings, and I have memorized the entire ritual. If you tell me the deactivation phrase, right now I will lift the wrench and you will speak it, and the device will go dark, and I will let you live, and let you return to your temple, and no Vethkai will speak of you again." The Blood Warden's eyes focused for a moment. Cyrex could see him thinking. "The Order of the Ninth Silence," she said. She was not lying. She had memorized the ritual. She was making a bet. The Blood Warden's eyes closed for a moment. Then his mandible loosened a fraction. Hal, watching, eased the wrench. The Blood Warden whispered a phrase. Cyrex bent close, listened, memorized. Then she reached back to the low table, picked up the ivory-colored oblong device, and spoke the deactivation phrase in fluent ritual tone Kovhari. The green light went out. The blood warden collapsed. Hal watched him for a long 5 seconds. Then he touched the pulse point at the blood warden's carotid analog. "He is out," he said. "Not dead. Out. You said you would let him live." "I did. He is alive. He will not wake up for a long time." Cyrex stood. She was breathing hard. Her carapace lights were pulsing an involuntary color she did not have a name for. She looked at Hal. "Voss. Ma'am. You are impressive." He blinked once, slowly. He did not answer. "Now the Admiral," she said. The corridor between the diplomatic wing and the Admiral's suite, 3 decks up, was not a stealth approach. It was a service corridor patrolled by ceremonial guards, all of them Vethkai, all of them technically under Keshvur's chain rather than hers. Cyrex would not be able to walk it openly. They took the crawl space instead. Hal knew every crawl space. It was, in the end, the argument for a maintenance technician with a fire axe. She followed him on her belly, along a rail she had never known existed above the ceiling of her own flagship. She heard the ship humming around her. She heard the reactor. She heard Hal's shallow breathing beside her and the small hiss of pain he made every time his ribs caught on a support beam. They came up through the floor of the Admiral's private study. Keshvur was there. He was sitting at a low desk in an ambassadorial robe, and he was drinking honey water from a thermal tube, and he was watching, on a small private screen, the wardroom footage from that afternoon. He was watching Hal come out of the vent with the wrench. He did not look up when the floor panel lifted. He said without turning, "I was wondering when you would come, Voss." Hal came up through the floor. He set the panel down. He straightened. His fire axe was in his right hand. His wrench was in his belt loop. Cyrex came up behind him with her sidearm level. Keshvur turned. His carapace lights were the calm silver of a Vethkai senior officer at rest. He did not look afraid. "General," he said to Cyrex. "Admiral, I hoped it would not come to this." "You hoped it would come to what it came to," she said, "which is that Vethlund would kill me in my sleep, and you would receive the corridor authority, and I would be a footnote." "Yes," he said, "something like that." She had expected him to lie. She had not expected him to admit it. She did not answer. "You will not shoot me, General," he said. "I have a dead man's device on my person. If you shoot me, you kill 418 crew, including yourself and Voss. The ship is bracketed. I lifted the codes off the Blood Warden through the ambassadorial link when your maintenance technician disabled his trigger. The Blood Warden's trigger has been transferred to mine. I am the trigger now." Cyrex went very still. Hal looked at Keshvur. He said, "Show me the device." Keshvur, with slow ceremonial care, opened his ambassadorial robe. Around his neck on a fine chain was a small ivory-colored oblong. The light was green. Hal looked at it for a long moment. Then he said, "Ma'am?" "Yes, Voss." "Do you trust me?" "Yes, Voss." "All right." He walked toward Keshvur. Cyrex did not stop him. Keshvur watched him come. His lights were still silver. He was smiling in the Vethkai way, which was a slow scissoring of the mandible plates. "Voss," he said, "you are a soldier. You know what a dead man's device means. You cannot reach me before I trigger it." "Sir, you do not want to kill me." "Sir, I do." "You cannot." "Sir," Hal said, "the trigger you have will not detonate." Keshvur's lights flickered. "You are lying," he said. "I am not." General Kolvryan spoke the deactivation phrase over the Blood Warden's original device 7 minutes ago. She spoke it in ritual tone Kovhari correctly on the primary trigger before you lifted the codes. The deactivation propagates to all linked secondaries. The ceremony has a redundancy. I am guessing you do not know that because you are a Vethkai admiral, not a Kovhari cleric, and it is written in the ninth Silence's second book of rights, which the general knows because she has been reading treaties for 11 years, and you have not." Keshvar's mandible plates stopped moving. Cyrex behind Hal felt the thing in her chest that had been very tight for 6 hours slowly begin to loosen. Because she had in fact spoken the deactivation phrase, and she had in fact read the second book of rights, and she had in fact known that the deactivation propagated, she had not been sure Hal knew. Keshavar looked down at his trigger. The green light was still green. He said, "That does not mean." Hal took 2 steps and put the fire axe through Keshavar's chest. The stroke went in under the collarbone at an angle. It was not a decapitation stroke. It was a wildland stroke, a stroke a fireman uses to open a burning door. It went through the ceremonial robe and the ambassadorial dress plate and the light chest armor Keshavar was wearing underneath it, and it opened the admiral from clavicle to sternum in one motion. Keshavar's hand went for the trigger. His hand did not close on it. He fell backward off the low stool. His lights went dark. The trigger swung on its chain and hit the deck with a small tap. The green light stayed green for 1 more second. Then it went out. Cyrex realized she had stopped breathing. She started again. Hal knelt. He picked up the trigger. He looked at it. He put it in his coverall pocket. He looked at her. "Ma'am," he said, "you did know the second book of rights." "I did. I was pretty sure." "You were guessing." "Ma'am, at the end of a day like this, everybody is guessing." She looked at him. She looked at the Admiral. She looked at the wardroom footage still playing on the private screen. Hal Voss walking through a phase disruptor beam. She said quietly, "Voss." "Ma'am." "You were in the 103rd. "Yes, ma'am." "You were at Vesikin." "Yes, ma'am." "Your unit was declared dead by this man." She gestured at Keshavar. "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" Hal was quiet for a long moment. He sat down on the deck. He was starting to shake in the way a man shakes when the last of his adrenaline goes. "We held Vesikin for 11 weeks, he said. "We were not supposed to. The coalition sent us in expecting a 2-week delay and a symbolic hold. We had 35 people. The Kovari sent over 11 weeks, a little more than 1,400. We killed most of them. When the coalition retook the colony, they found what they thought were 35 bodies. Some of those bodies were us. Some were Kovari in our uniforms. Some were unrecognizable. The point is, when the accounting was done, the coalition had 35 human bodies and a memorial wall. They put 35 names on the wall. 2 of the names were of men who were still alive. 2. Me and 1 other. His name was Chen. He is dead now. He died in a shuttle accident 6 years ago that was not a shuttle accident. I have been alone for 6 years. Why did Keshavar seal your file? Because we had held Vesikin for 11 weeks against 1,400 Kovari, and it made the coalition look weak by comparison. It also made the humans look, in coalition politics, valuable. Keshavar did not want the humans to look valuable. Keshavar wanted the humans to stay Tier 0. He put me on this ship because he thought if he needed a Tier 0 body for a manufactured accident, he had one on hand. He did not think I would ever come out of Deck 4. But you did. Ma'am, I was in the corridor. You were early. Yes, ma'am. Why? He looked at her. He looked tired. Because my sister writes me every Tuesday, he said. And Tuesdays my shift starts at 1500. And I read her letter on my Legacy Earth terminal on my lunch break, and I write back before shift. And this Tuesday, she wrote that the walk-up radiator is broken again, and she is sleeping in her snowsuit. And I wanted to answer her before shift. And to answer her before shift, I needed to be in the alcove by 1300 to route a message through the Coalition's civilian relay, which is slow, so I was early. And the vent shaft comes up through the diplomatic corridor. and I heard the ceiling filaments go dead. Cyrex did not say anything. He said, "That is the whole reason, ma'am. She writes to me on Tuesdays." She stood in the study of a dead Vethkai admiral, with the body of the man who had erased his memorial name at her feet, and she felt her carapace lights do a color she had never seen a Vethkai general do. It was the color her species used for grief and gratitude at the same time. She said, "Voss, ma'am, get up. We are going to your ready room. You are going to draft the after action. I am going to sign it. In the morning, I am going to unseal your file. I am going to publish it. I am going to remove your name from the Vesican Memorial and put you on the active service registry with restored rank." Hal looked up at her. "Ma'am, yes, with respect. I don't want it." She stared at him. "You do not want your rank restored?" "No, ma'am. You would prefer to remain a maintenance technician?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because," he said, "if my rank is restored, my sister loses the survival clause. It only pays out under contract terms. Officer pay is different. Officer benefits are different. She would move from a guaranteed clause to a guaranteed no. The Tier 0 contract pays her either way. Restored rank does not. Ma'am, with respect, I am not here for glory. I am here for the walk-up radiator." She was silent. He said, "Also, if I am on the active service registry, Keshavur's replacement can order me redeployed. And if I am redeployed, I am not near your quarters when the next Vethalan comes through the door. And ma'am, there is going to be a next Vethalan. There is always a next Vethalan." She sat down on the low stool the Admiral had been drinking from. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "You want to stay on Deck 4? "Yes, ma'am." "Maintaining legacy relay banks?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you want the walk-up radiator fixed?" He smiled for the first time she had ever seen. It was a very small smile, and it was a very tired smile, and it did something to her that she would not think about until much later. "Yes, ma'am." "Anything else?" He considered the question with the seriousness of a man taking a formal inquiry. "Ma'am," he said, "Deck 4 does not have a coffee machine. It is legacy Earth infrastructure. There is a socket for one. The socket has been there since the Coalition retrofit. Nobody has ever put a machine in the socket because coffee is a human beverage and the Deck 4 ration line does not carry it. If you could requisition a coffee machine and a case of ground coffee, real ground coffee, not the synthetic paste, ma'am, that would be sufficient." She stared at him. She said, "Voss, I have just watched you kill a Kavari blood warden, a Vethkai admiral, and 11 Kavari operatives. You are going to sit here in the study of the second most senior officer in the Coalition military, whom you have just decapitated in half, and ask me for a coffee machine." "Yes, ma'am," she said in Vethkai, a word that had no clean translation, and which the ship's translator did not attempt. Then she said, "In trade standard, consider it requisitioned." "Thank you, ma'am." "And the case of ground coffee." "Thank you, ma'am." "And the walk-up radiator." "Ma'am, thank you." She stood. She said, "Voss." "Ma'am, I misjudged you." "Ma'am, with respect, everybody does. It is how I am useful." She looked at him a long moment. Then she nodded once. "All right," she said, "then we will keep it that way. On paper you remain Tier 0. Off paper you have my private line and any resource you need. Off paper you are the closest thing to a personal guard I have ever had, and I have had many. When I need you, I will call. When your sister needs a radiator, she will have a radiator. When the coffee runs out, the coffee will be replaced. When there is another Vethalan, we will find him early." "Yes, ma'am." "And Voss, ma'am, do not walk through a disruptor beam again if you can avoid it. It is bad for the carpet." He laughed. It was a short laugh, and it cost him, and he pressed his hand to his ribs on the laugh. But it was a laugh. "Yes, ma'am." The rest of the night was administrative. Cyrex ordered the ship to stations under her own personal authorization. She stripped Keshvur's command codes with her second Book of Rights deactivation still hot in her memory. She had the tactical net rebuilt through her chief engineer, an officer who had not answered to Vethlin but to reactor safety alone. She had Vethlin taken to the medical deck under restraint, alive, because Vethlin was a witness and she wanted him for the tribunal. She had the Blood Warden extracted alive through the diplomatic corridor and returned to the Kovari delegation with a private note that read, "In trade, Kovari, we know." The Kovari delegation withdrew before the middle shift bell. The Vesikin Corridor Closure Treaty died on the ship without being signed. At 0600, when the first shift lights came up, Cyrex sat at her desk and wrote a personal report to Coalition Command with her own hand and none of the tactical net's assistance. She detailed everything. She named Keshvur. She named the sealed file. She named the Blood Warden and the trigger and the ambassadorial suite. She named the wardroom incident. She did not name Hal Voss. In her report, an unnamed maintenance technician had been present during 3 separate incidents and had provided material assistance in each. That was all. She sent the report. Then she requisitioned from Deck 4 Supply 1 coffee machine, industrial grade, human specification. Then she requisitioned a case of ground coffee, real Ontario blend if it could be sourced. Then she signed a private disbursement from her own personal account of 800 coalition credits per month to an address in Thunder Bay, on the northern rim of the Great Lakes, on a planet called Earth, for a term of 10 Terran years, tagged for the maintenance and radiator upkeep of 1 cold water walk-up. She did all of this before she slept. She did not sleep well. She dreamed of a maintenance technician walking through a phase disruptor beam. In the morning, Hal Voss was already back on Deck 4. He was in the alcove that was his ready room. He had cleaned the wrench. He had stapled his shoulder closed again where the previous night's field job had opened up. He had a fresh coverall. He was sitting in front of his legacy Earth relay terminal and he was writing to his sister. He was telling her that the radiator would be fixed. He was telling her that he was fine. He was telling her that he missed her. He did not tell her about the corridor. He did not tell her about the admiral. He did not tell her about the general with the private line. At the bottom of his message he wrote, "There is going to be a coffee machine down here soon. A real one. I will send you a picture." He hit send. He picked up the wrench. He hung it on the wall by the door, where it had always hung, because a Deck 4 maintenance technician needed a wrench, and the Coalition had never taken his wrench away, and it had never occurred to them to. He sat down. He waited for his shift. Somewhere 3 decks above him, General Cyrex Kolvryan was drafting an unsealed operational note in her ready room that would, in 7 weeks, become the founding document of a small, unofficial working group inside Coalition Command. The working group would have exactly 3 permanent members. 1 would be a general, 1 would be a chief engineer, 1 would be a maintenance technician with a Tier 0 clearance, a fire axe hung on the wall by the door, and a private line to the general's desk. The working group would have no formal name. Inside Coalition Command, quietly, the officers who knew about it would call it, in a phrase that did not translate cleanly out of Vethkai, the corridor. Because Voss had been in the corridor, and after that day, so, in a manner of speaking, was she. The story of that night ran, unofficially, along the Deck 4 crew rotations, and then along the technical wing rotations, and then along the officer rotations. And by the end of the standard month, it had reached the Coalition capital, where it was retold in the officer clubs in 6 languages, and where it acquired in every retelling the same closing beat. They said the general demoted the human who saved her. They said that night he saved her twice more. They said, when it was all over, when the Blood Warden was on his way home, and the admiral was in the coalition morgue, and the treaty was dead on the table, the general asked the human what he wanted for it all. They said he asked for a coffee machine. And they said, the general laughed. Then they always got quiet. Then they always drank. Then they always agreed that if there was another admiral and another treaty and another corridor, they hoped the general still had her human on deck 4, because a Vethkai general in a coalition war room can command a fleet, but a human with a wrench in the ceiling, they said, is a different weapon. He is not invincible. He bleeds, he breaks, he gets tired. He goes home to a cold water walk-up on the northern rim of the Great Lakes, and he reads letters from a 12-year-old girl, and he writes back before shift. But when the ceiling filaments go dead, and the assassins come through the door, and the general is on the far side of the table with a locked drawer and no sidearm, he's in the corridor. He is always in the corridor. And that, they said, makes all the difference. What a story. What a hard, bloody, quiet story. The real weapon in this galaxy is not the disruptor, and it is not the exo-frame, and it is not the fleet. The real weapon is the man nobody bothered to look at, who was in the corridor before the corridor knew it needed him. If this story moved you, leave your like. It is what keeps stories like this on the air. And it is what tells the algorithm that we should keep making them. Share this with someone who loves science fiction about the human who was never supposed to matter and turned out to be the one thing the Empire could not survive. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you do not miss the next HFY epic, because Deck 4 has more corridors and more coffee and more nights that end with a general owing a debt she did not know she could owe. And then answer this in the comments, because I need to know. Would you have hired Hal to train your entire fleet? Or would you have taken the coffee machine, gone back to Thunder Bay, and never looked at the stars again? Keep your eye on the empty places between the stars. There is always a human in the corridor. Keep looking up.